Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himvar, and today we're going to talk about another medieval romance, another medieval work, just another Arthurian romance, actually. And this time it's actually a romance associated with the Mabinogion, um, which is going to be a little unsurprising if you're familiar with the naming conventions, as this romance is Peredur, which is the Welsh version of Percival. So this one is from the 12th or the 13th century, um, maybe coming from some earlier source. Maybe it was oral, maybe it was written, but essentially it actually follows the story of Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, right? The story of the Grail, which was the first Percival romance I went over here because that is the one that makes the most sense to go over first. We covered Percival by Chrétien de Troyes, covered Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach, and we've covered, let's see, Perilous Faust, and we've covered Sir Percival of Gallus, the Middle English poem, and now we're going to cover Peredur, son of Efrawg, is the full name for it, and we'll probably cover Parzival's saga as well at some point. That one might take me more time depending on how I want to go about that, whether I want to translate it myself or just read it in translation. So, um, though translating it myself would be a lot more work, it'd be a lot more fun in some ways as well. So, uh, this is essentially that continuation, though. It is a something that kind of finishes Chrétien's story, which was incomplete, right? It is his last romance. He did not finish it, right? It ends in the middle of an episode dealing with Gawain, not even Percival, right? There are some differences though here in Peredur, and it's actually not that long, but it seems like it may preserve some things that from a different source, right? It may be preserving some things of what might be Chrétien's source for all we know, right? And so it definitely has a different flavor to it. Now it is a Welsh source; it's not French. Most of these things we've been looking at in French or heavily influenced by the French sources, right? We've looked at German as well as English, um, and so the Welsh sources, well, they're a little interesting actually because a lot of the stuff isn't written down much until later, and so when you get something like Peredur, you actually have a story that seems to be taken from the French sources, even though those French sources originally are taken from Welsh sources, and so they're kind of playing off of each other, which is very typical in literature in general. I would say, just how the game works when you're looking at literature from the Middle Ages, in particular. So. Um, it is found actually in four manuscripts, Peredur. Notably, two of those. The one is the White Book of Rutherk, and the other one is the Red Book of Hergus, which is maybe the most famous of those, as that is inspiration for the Red Book in Tolkien's uh, Legendarium. So the translation I read, I believe it said it was by Jones and Jones, but I'm not sure who that is. I read it online. It would be an old translation regardless. It did have a sort of antiquated style to it, probably some translation from 100 or so odd years ago. But so, like some of the other versions, like Sir Percival of Gallus, actually is the big one here. Um, there's no Grail, right? So there was a Grail in Percival. We didn't quite know what it was. We're not sure if it was really holy. We really don't get the conclusion to the story. In Parzival, you do have a Grail, but it's a rock. Okay, it seems like it's probably a platter in Chrétien's stuff. And then in Perilous Faust, it's pretty typical Grail cup, holy Grail thing going on. In Percival, Sir Percival of Gallus, you don't have a Grail at all. Though there seems like maybe there is like evidence that there was one in the story originally. Of course, obviously, the story is coming from French, so it would make sense. Um, and but here we don't have a Grail, right? In fact, um, we have something replacing the Grail, and you can see this in the thumbnail if you're looking, if you look at closely at it. But Efrawg, essentially, the story starts, has six sons who are slain in war, and he is also slain in war. But he has a seventh son who survives. Now, first off, starting off with his pedigree, starting off with his parentage, is different than some of these versions. As if I remember correctly, Percival never establishes who Percival's father is. Right, Chrétien does not, and so you get different answers in the different romances. And here, right away, we have a guy named Efrawg. Right. Um, and so his seventh son, which an auspicious number, is Percival, and he survives, or Peredur here, right? Um, The name Efrawg is etymologically connected to the name York. So Peredur may have originally been some Brittonic prince of the city. That's a guess by some scholars, but there is no record of this actually. And so again, just a guess. And he is often Percival as well. Peredur is often associated with the character Pryderi from the Mabinogion. Mabinogion being like the key like mythological source for Welsh and by extension in some case then Brittonic myth. Though how old it is and how antique that is another video. I mean, you have things like Anwin, right, and Aran. Aran is literally the name Aaron from Hebrew. So not a super old name then as far as concerning Welsh myth. So but you have interesting stuff like that. But anyways, we're not talking about the Mabinogion much, but Peredur likewise here, he's raised rather ignorantly. We don't get a ton of details about this, but he sees three knights, he thinks they're angels. It's not quite as comic. Definitely there's a different feel here in Peredur. His mom gives him similar advice to naive Peredur. Some of it actually in this case though being largely like blatantly bad, right? And like how I would describe it at least, right? Here's some, for example, if thou see a fair jewel, take it and give it to another, and thou shalt have fame thereby, which is a fair system of, gift giving from a lord, reciprocity. But then if thou see a fair lady, make love to her, even though she desire thee not, which is not great advice. So anyways, again, the relation to Chrétien seems pretty evident as well, like in some ways, because I know some people have a tendency to say that the Arthurian stuff really originates in the Mabinogion, but really the Mabinogion sources we have are really coming around the same time as these early romances in Old French. So, for example, there are some passages that seem to be word for word from Chrétien, right? And in one instance, actually, we have something that how do I say this essentially? Okay, so we have the little procession, right? And we have the spear in the Grail in Chrétien's version. In this version, it is a head on a platter. And how this head is related to Percival is revealed later in the romance. But we have the spear, and this is a giant spear, very big. And it is described as when it shows up, it has two bearers and it has three drops running down it, 3 drops of blood. But then later in the romance, how is it described? It is described as having a single bearer and a single drop running down it, which is exactly how it is described in Chrétien's Percival, right? And then doesn't make any sense, right? That whoever's writing this down got the sources mixed up, got mixed up themselves, got confused. Very common. You see stuff like this. Very hard to amend, though, at the same time, right? That's the fun thing about studying codicology, just in general. You don't have the same editorial like work going into a manuscript for a lot of reasons, but and so you can tell that this is coming from Chrétien's source, right? Because you have that mishap. When it first is encountered, it's a different encounter than is in Chrétien's. When that encounter is recounted later by a witch, it describes Chrétien's rather than the one earlier in Peredur. So also the head on a platter is a very common motif to Bran the Blessed stories, who is often considered the source for the Fisher King. Bran means raven. He's also often wounded, right? The head being the seat of life and the soul in Celtic belief. You kind of actually see this in something like Sir Gawain the Green Knight, right? A talking head just chilling, right? So the head doesn't really talk in here, but this head is important, right? And we also have some other interesting stuff, like stuff that is more familiar, right? Like Peredur and Kay. Kay is still like a dirty rascal. He's not as terrible as he is in Perilous Faust, right? Which has this exception where he literally kills the king's son in Perilous Faust, right? He's just kind of a jerk, right, normally, but he's still part of Arthur's court. He is one of Arthur's retainers, right, as cupbearer. But in this case, Peredur actually absolutely beats the crud out of Kay at one point, and it's really nice. There is a squire approaches Peredur, and Peredur is contemplating his love, and so he doesn't want to be bothered, so he beats up the squire. And then 24 knights come after him afterwards, and he beats up all these in the same manner by throwing them off their horses and stuff. And then Kay comes, and Peredur breaks Kay's arm, breaks his shoulder, and then he tramples him under his horse 21 times. And supposedly he doesn't even know it's Kay, which is just funny. But anyways, and also there is a scene. There are certain notable scenes, right, that are not found in the French romances, right? One of them, there's an adonk, or as called an affonk, in if you watch, for example, in the Merlin episode, the BBC's Merlin, the Mark of Nimue, there's the affonk shows up, which is a lake monster essentially that is kind of confusingly described. It's not very clear what exactly it is. And 3 chieftains ride daily to it, and they get killed by it daily until they are resurrected by the court maidens. And it is an interesting cycle that again, daily happens, and very mythological in some sense. But before Percival comes in and does his thing, so who is of course a very innocent but very strong knight, as typical. In this one, actually, though, the first person he slays is not the Red Knight. It is someone who's done equally bad things. He pretty much fills the same roles. The Red Knight just isn't wearing red, if I recall correctly. Though there is a Red Knight later in the story called Edlem Red Sword. And Peredur actually he's not super important, but he sets him up with a countess instead. Pretty much Peredur is matching people so together, which is interesting. And then we also have like more stuff. So after Peredur returns to court, where the Gawain part of the story is in Chrétien's romance, Peredur goes on further adventures, right? And eventually he goes against these witches. It ends pretty much right after that, and presumably he gets some good fame in at King Arthur's court. And as always, as well, Gawain does a really good job. He's a great knight. He is really a foil to Kay, rather, in the story. He's called Gwalchmai here, which is his Welsh name, just like Peredur is the Welsh name of Percival, Welsh version of it, rather. But overall, it feels very similar in some ways to the French romances, but heavily with that Welsh flair as well. Very Celtic in some ways, and so in a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like the French ones at all. So I definitely feel like you get some worth reading this one if you are familiar with the French ones, and it is definitely worthwhile. It's not super long, and there's lots of good stuff for it. Like I said, the French and Welsh tales are kind of playing off each other. You can obviously see this is influenced by the French tales, which of course those French tales are originally coming from these Welsh tales, or largely Brittonic tales more broadly, originally anyhow. So again, which is nice to see. It's nice to compare and contrast this all. And I think it's a very fun adventure. This is now my 5th Percival romance I've looked at. I got one more at least loaded, and we'll see when we get to that. I do have more. I'd at least have one more Grail story as well, but that one's not really Percival focused, but Galahad. So, which is the later tradition. So anyhow, let me know if you've read Peredur. Let me know if you would like to, and what you think, how it compares to the French ones. And Liam from Liam's Lesson. I'll catch you next time.